The Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability Deal. This is the deal that apparently, as some headlines have put it, Palantir has missed out on. And that's not necessarily the case, and here's why. This is a $9 billion cloud infrastructure deal that was just awarded to Google, Oracle, Amazon, and Microsoft from the Pentagon. Now, it's a $9 billion deal combined. One of the four companies receiving cloud computing contracts from the Pentagon, all of them had received requests for bids from the U.S. federal agency last year, so this took a year for them to ultimately allocate this capital. At the time, the General Services Administration didn't expect that Oracle, a lesser player in the cloud infrastructure business, would be able to meet the Pentagon's needs, and the contract for the four companies is a total of $9 billion. The goal of this contract is for the U.S. Defense Department to rely on multiple providers for a remotely operated infrastructure technology, as opposed to relying on a single company, a strategy promoted during the Trump administration. That right there is the core keyword to understand from this for sort of rationalizing why Palantir is not included in this $9 billion deal. Infrastructure technology. This is a deal for cloud infrastructure technology. Palantir is not a company that is trying to build cloud infrastructure technology. Why? Because that is already done. GCP, AWS, Azure from Microsoft. Like, obviously there's other players in this space that do it to a lesser degree or do it different types of different cloud infrastructure technology services, but those are the three heavy players, right? AWS did something like $50-60 billion of revenue last year for Amazon. So that's not the world Palantir is playing in. Palantir is playing on a level above that, on a distributed service layer that is able to help you interpret and analyze the data that is stored within a cloud, which I would argue is a much more valuable piece of technology and software and platform. And people like CodeStrap, that we've had multiple times on the channel, and talking to him, who works with this stuff every day, has also kind of echoed that same idea, that the reason you're investing in Palantir over something like an AWS is because AWS is a commodity. Now, do they have millions of servers and tons of infrastructure and warehouses? Yes, but that's because they've achieved economies of scale. But it's just storing the data in the cloud at the end of the day. That's what it does. And like, that's why you've got a lot of competition for this. The reason, hypothetically, Palantir is a monopoly and doesn't have competition is because knowing what to do with the data to be able to make decisions that allow the public health infrastructure of the United States to not break when a pandemic happens in the future, which is why the CDC just gave them 5 years, $443 million. That's where the real value is, and that's where the exponential value is going to be in the future. So let's read a little bit from this article. An increasing tally of businesses have also sought to rely on more than one cloud provider. In some cases, they rely on specialized capabilities on one of the majority of front-end and back-end workloads on another. At other times, they come down to cost. Having more than one cloud might make organizations more confident that they can withstand service disruptions brought on by outages. And this is the reason Palantir did not get this deal at the forefront. The DoD, the Pentagon, they don't want to just rely on Amazon. They don't want to just rely on Google for a couple of reasons. Number one, that gives too much power to one company, and obviously they don't want to have all of their very classified data stored in just AWS or GCP. They would like to have it a little bit more distributed. Second of all, if there's an outage and there is a problem in one area, then they have the ability to shift to something else, which is why they don't want to give a unilateral $9 billion to one company. They want to have it more distributed. And hey, like, they're American companies. You want to give more money to American companies if you're the government, and, you know, spread the wealth a little bit in order to create a more competitive economy. So Palantir is not specializing in the front end and back end workload of your cloud computing data. That's not the goal of Palantir. So when people are saying Palantir missed out on this contract, it kind of just doesn't make any sense. I don't think they were ever competing for cloud infrastructure technology, because they're not a cloud infrastructure technology company. So at that point, it doesn't make sense necessarily for Amazon to be able to get it. Now, one other thing that was interesting here, a couple quick stats. Oracle generated $900 million in cloud infrastructure revenue in the quarter that ended August 31st. A small fraction of $20.5 billion, which is what Amazon represented or was able to generate. But Palantir is going to do about $9 billion for the year in revenue. Oracle's getting $900 million, half of Palantir's revenue just off of cloud infrastructure technology. So Palantir is not a cloud infrastructure company. They're a data optimization company, which is just a different thing. Now, one of the things that's interesting here is the General Services Administration stated that at the time when they were asking for bids a year ago, only Amazon and Microsoft seemed to be able to meet the Pentagon's requirements, but Google, Oracle ultimately ended up getting into the deal, which is what was announced a couple of days ago. Why was only Amazon and Microsoft originally being considered for this $9 billion contract? They have something called IL6 certification, which is the highest level security clearance that you can have with the DoD. It is higher than any security clearance that exists on the planet when it comes to the United States federal government. Both of them are trillion-dollar companies. Amazon now by like $900 billion. Palantir just got IL6 certification back in October, and they are a $16 billion company. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because for a cloud infrastructure technology contract worth $9 billion, originally only 2 companies were considered for it. Eventually they expanded to Google and Oracle, which makes sense to make it a little bit more distributed. But originally it was just 2 companies. And those 2 companies were not just because they had cloud infrastructure technology services, AWS and Azure. It was because they actually have the security clearance, which means they meet the thresholds of what the United States takes when it comes to security to be able to effectively and safely store that data. Palantir is also in that camp. It's the only other company in the world in that camp. So it's just funny to think about Palantir's not getting this contract because they don't build cloud infrastructure technology. But if they did, they would be in the running with Microsoft and Amazon that are 20 times bigger than Palantir, more than 20 times bigger than Palantir. These $1 trillion companies. Palantir is a $15 billion company to even be able to compete with it. So, it at least it points to a little bit more of like where the direction of Palantir is going if they're able to execute, given the ballpark that they're playing in when it comes to the US DoD. Now, the final thing I'll say on this is there is still a world in which Palantir gets some of this $9 billion. Palantir is a product, and this I learned really 6-7 months ago, and it really started forming my thesis, that is able to work on multiple different cloud providers. And it's important to understand this, right? And CodeStrap, shout out to him again. He did a really good job explaining this on the channel, which is Palantir is a distributed service layer of ontology that can work on top of GCP. It can work on top of AWS. It can work on top of Azure. Like the future, when we talk about decentralized, it's not just like this whole crypto decentralized thing. What decentralization actually means is, can I, as a tech company, immediately go from A to B without being beholden to these terms of services and lengthy contracts to just A? Can I switch from AWS to GCP immediately? And can I move all my operationalized workflows onto one different distributed service layer? Like that is real decentralization. And the world that Palantir is playing in, which is, by the way, why they work on top of AWS. They announced, press releases with them, I think back in 2021, November, and why they work with GCP. They announced that back in June. Is because they are able to work on top of that service, which means Google is able to recommend GCP clients that pay for cloud compute, which is where a lot of the money is. The bet on Palantir is that a lot of the money is going to be in the sub layer of that, which is the data and analysis portion of your cloud stored data over the next 10 years. Google can recommend Palantir to clients. AWS can recommend Palantir to clients. Accenture, which is a consulting firm they work with, can recommend Palantir to clients because it's not a question of recommending a cloud service provider. There's 3 big ones. You can pick which whenever you want. I have a startup. We use AWS. It's the easiest. But when it comes to getting massive amounts of data centralized in one place and being able to operationalize that, know how to use it. So for example, the Tampa General Bay Hospital just secured a deal with Palantir, and their job is to figure out how can they make their supply chains more effective? How can they make the distribution of their logistics more effective? How can they make their academic research, it's one of the top 50 hospitals in the United States in certain verticals, more effective? How can they make their staffing and cost-based structures more effective? All of this stuff is a data problem. This is not something that GCP is going to solve for them. Now, Google may try to offer different services. For example, AWS has a bunch of different microservices that try to help people with this problem. But at the end of the day, like the goal is, can you take all this data and build me a product that lets me know what to do with it so I can make better decisions? And that's something that cloud infrastructure technology is not doing. That's something a company like Palantir would be doing. So there is a world in which of this $9 billion, you could imagine maybe Google, Amazon, or Microsoft contracts Palantir to do some type of data analysis on top of it. I don't know if that's going to happen. We'll see. But I don't think they were ever in the running for winning a cloud infrastructure technology contract. So at the end of the day, I don't think it's the biggest deal if they're not getting a piece of this contract right now. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching. Do you think Palantir is able to get some of this $9 billion? And do you think in the future, here's the question, that they ever move into cloud infrastructure technology? I don't think they do. I think they could easily do it. But that's the reason they don't do it, because it's so easy. They want to do something that's hard and that's actually valuable in the long term. Thanks so much for listening and watching. I'll see you in the next one.